NT.
All right, welcome back to the Steve Hook Show on TNT Radio. Very happy, actually very honored to welcome my next guest, Dr. Rainer Zitelmann. He is he's a libertarian. He's a sociologist. He is a author. He is a contributor to many, many magazines and newspapers. He's a contributor to Forbes, Washington Examiner, as I mentioned earlier. And I welcome him to the program. Dr. Zitelmann, good evening, sir. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hello, good morning. Now here it's 20 minutes after midnight.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's late for you. Okay,
No
well,
problem.
we'll just say, well, good day. It's good to have you with us today. I want to talk to you about, you've always risen to the defense of capitalism. And it seems to me, at least in the United States, and I think this is probably a safe bet in large parts of Europe as well, that socialism is on the march. And the embrace of what here some of the younger proponents of socialism like to refer to as democratic socialism, as if that puts some patina of legitimacy to it. But why don't you give us your take on this rise in socialism throughout the Western world?
Yes, unfortunately, this is true. It's almost everywhere that we go more and more in the direction of a planned economy. Few weeks ago, I got the new Index of Economic Freedom. This is a ranking from the Heritage Foundation. They do it since 1995 about economic freedom. And for the United States, it was the worst ranking since they started with their index. And even now, there are 16 European countries, according to this ranking, more economically free than the United States. But this doesn't mean that Europe is economically free. On the contrary, I could tell a lot about this. We go more and more in the direction of a planned economy, but it shows how dangerous the situation is right now. And it's the bad thing. It's almost everywhere in the world. Look, also Latin America, even in Chile, that was the most capitalist country in Latin America with a great standard of living. They voted for socialist, and now almost all Latin America is again going in the direction of socialism. Well, look what happened in China. In China, they had this crazy socialist system, but then in the beginning of the 80s, they introduced private property, pro-market reforms. I think Deng Xiaoping, he was a great reformer. They had a lot of success. A lot of people came out of poverty in China. Now they go back in the direction with this Xi Jinping, more state. So to sum up, it happens almost everywhere in the world. The funny thing, I've been half a year ago in Vietnam. They call themselves communist and socialist, but this was the only country I found who embrace really more and more economic freedom. And it's much harder to find a Marxist there in Vietnam than to find in Europe or the United States, because they had their lesson learned with socialism. So this is really crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. I wonder if, and this is just something I'm just asking you. I don't know that there's any validity to this, but it is curious. Is this like a secular thing, Dr. Zitelmann? In other words, are we just kind of seeing this and then it's going to turn around and then people will say, hey, wait a minute, we got to right the ship. Or in other words, are we going to have to go through the misery of socialism in order to realize the mistake of socialism?
To be honest, I don't know, because I'm an historian. And as the historian, I know history, it's full of surprise. Sometimes this is my hope, sometimes with positive surprise, sometimes with negative surprise. But what I see right now is that if let's compare the 80s, for example, with now. In the 80s and beginning of the 90s, we had Ronald Reagan, for me, the greatest president of the United States. We had Maggie Thatcher in the UK. we had Deng Xiaoping in China, we had even in Sweden and these countries pro-market reforms. And now it's like 30 years after socialism, people forget what socialism means. And, you know, there's a younger generation, they haven't lived with socialism, and the only possibility for them would be to hear about it at school. But the problem is they hear in the schools and universities a lot about the evils of capitalism, but nothing about socialist history. And the problem with socialism is socialism looks sometimes good on paper, but not when the paper is a history book. And so I think they should learn more about history. I give you one example. I spoke about China. In the end of the 50s, there was this so-called Great Leap Forward by Mao Zedong. 45 million people died this time in China. 45 million people. It was the biggest socialist experiment in history. And when I have my lectures, and I have it all over the world, I have it in Asia, Latin America, Europe, United States, I ask everywhere, have you heard about this biggest socialist experiment in history at school? Did your teacher tell you about this? Only very few people raise their hands and say, yes, I heard about this at school. The majority, most 90%, have never heard about this. And I think this is a tragedy. This is the reason why I'm writing my books about capitalism and socialism. And by the way, I produced also a film about, you can Google it, and your audience can get it for free on the internet. It's Life Behind the Berlin Wall. I got an award for this film at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas last July, and what I did there, I you know, because I come from Germany, it's good to compare it, because you know, this was socialist East Germany, capitalist West Germany, the same country, the same history, the same language, the same culture, only different economic system. And so you could compare it. And this is what I do. May I ask you something? What do you guess, for example, how long did you have to wait to get a car in East Germany? What do you guess?
Oh, goodness. I would say months to a year, maybe.
So the shortest time was 12 years. The longest time, 17 years, to wait for a car. In West Germany, as in the United States, you could go to every shop, store, buy the car and drive away. And what car did you get after this 12 or 17 years? The worst car in the world, because East Germany was famous for producing the worst car in the world, the so-called Trabi. By the way, a car that was very bad for the environment, not only very slow, very bad for the environment. Or another thing that people don't know, 27% of the people in East Germany in 1989 had to share their toilet with their neighbors, with other people in their house. They had not their own toilet. They had to go out of their apartment and share it with other people. And this was not in the 50s. It was 1989. Only 16% had their own telephone, compared to 99% in West Germany. These are some facts I think young people should hear about it. This is the way.
Well, you know, I do remember seeing videos of East Germans shortly after the wall came down, touring a West German supermarket, and they were stunned at everything that was for sale. They couldn't believe it. They were like in tears. They were like, this doesn't make sense, because they were used to their shelves that were stocked with a loaf or two of bread and maybe some crappy canned food or something. But yeah, absolutely. People that have lived through socialism tend to not want to go back to it. I have to take a break real quick, Dr. Zitelmann, but if you could hold on, I want to talk to you about why you think these colleges and universities specifically are pushing this down with capitalism, up with socialism, when their own history professors in those schools would probably tell you that's not a wise idea. But we'll talk about that when when we come back. My guest today is Dr. Rainier Zitelmann. You're listening to The Steve Hook Show on TNT Radio. We'll be right back.
I got a news flash for you.
TNT Radio News.
This is James O'Neill with a check of today's headlines. Ukrainian troops have been forced to withdraw from some territory in the battlefield city of Bakhmut as Russia mounts a renewed assault there with intense artillery fire over the past 2 days. Norway's government said Thursday it was expelling 15 Russian diplomats from the country, saying they were suspected of spying while working at the Russian embassy in Oslo.
Do you have a suggestion for a possible guest you'd like to hear on TNT Radio? Or perhaps you have a topic you feel we should discuss? Then we want to hear from you. Simply complete the suggestion form on the TNT Radio website. Help us make a difference on TNT Radio.
Okay, welcome back to the Steve Hook Show. And again, my guest today, Dr. Rainier Zitelmann. Dr. Zitelmann, thank you for holding on through the break. Now, we were discussing the rise of, it's really the massaging of socialism and trying to make it amenable to younger people. I think younger people are the only ones, probably because of lack of experience, lack of knowledge of this, that embrace this socialism, and they've been taught. And I know this is true in America, and I'm sure it's true in parts of Europe because I see these kids throwing cans of soup on, the Mona Lisa and whatnot. And it's basically capitalism is evil. Socialism, which is the bastard cousin of communism, socialism is good, and therefore we should embrace socialism. And they get this, in most cases, from their college professors and teachers, and even their teachers in high school and primary school. Why do you think these? Is it because these teachers, these Marxist professors, live in almost a socialist hierarchy with their tenureships and whatnot? Why does the academia embrace socialism so much and pour it into the minds of our youth?
It's a very good question, and the most important question, because the source of socialism, it's not the workers' movement. It never came from the workers. This is even something where Lenin and the libertarian economist Hayek agreed. The source of socialism is not the workers' movement, it's intellectuals. And the question is exactly what you said. Why do intellectuals why they don't like capitalism? And I wrote in another book, I had another book, The Power of Capitalism. I wrote one chapter only about this, but I can start, it's not so short, but I can start to explain it. Look, it's this way. If you come from a family with an academic background, like I, for example, they learned the more books you read, the higher should be your position in the society. It's the most important thing, how many books you read and have your degree on university and so. Then later, they believe it, and they learn the same thing then at school and university. And then later on in true life, they learn this is not only about how many books you read, but maybe their former school neighbor who's now an entrepreneur, who had some good ideas. Maybe he was bad at school, but he earns now maybe much more money. He had a bigger house, a bigger car, and the biggest problem, the prettier wife. And then this something is not correct with free market, because I should have the prettier wife, the bigger house, the bigger car, because I read more books than he does. So they don't understand that, in psychology, we distinguish between two ways how you can learn. We call one way explicit learning or academic learning, reading books. The other thing is, we call it implicit learning. Like, for example, the school of life, your experience in life. And this is much more important sometimes to be successful in life. And for entrepreneur, intellectuals, they don't understand. And so they don't understand the world. They think it's injustice. And another thing, they like to construct their theories. This is what they make their living for. But capitalism is not like someone has a theory and then try to implement this into society. It's a spontaneous developed system like animals or plants develop in a spontaneous process without intellectuals. So they are not so important for this. Though you find a lot of more answers, but the root is intellectuals. They don't like capitalism, and only if you understand this, because this is the root for all the socialist ideas.
It does seem to me that, when you were saying the two different types of education, the academic and then basically living your life. In other words, what you're saying, Dr. Zitelmann, is street smarts, common sense, and that kind of repels these academia professors and whatnot, because they are bubble dwelling people. They only hang out with fellow academics, and they only discuss these theories amongst themselves. And if only we could get the rest of the world to embrace our genius, then everything would be fine. But that's not the way it works in real life.
And that is the reason. So, for example, they sometimes or often they write their books in very complicated language. I have 2 PhDs, not only one in history and sociology, and I got award with the best you can get in history, summa cum laude. But I write my things in an easy way. I speak in an easy way because I think if you think clear, you can write and speak clear. Of course, I know when I speak, I have this German accent, but when I'm writing there, you can see no accent. It's really clear. Everyone can understand it. And if you read my book, for example, In Defense of Capitalism, yes, I have also there 900 footnotes. I have a bibliography. I used 360 books, but it's written in an easy way. But here, by the way, not to convince anti-capitalists. I know they will not buy this book, so I'm sure. They prefer to buy the new book from Bernie Sanders. I read the new book from Bernie Sanders, by the way. The title is "It's Why It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism." This is the new book from Bernie Sanders. And this is such a crazy book. I should say something about it for a minute. He has one chapter. We should abolish all billionaires in the United States. We should have 0 billionaires in the United States. But think about it for a moment. I'm sure he didn't think about it, because the only countries in the world where you have 0 billionaires is Cuba, North Korea, and the poorest African countries. You have some very poor African countries. So if he says the United States should be a country with single billionaires, you want to make something like Cuba or North Korea or poorest African countries. I remember a few years ago, he spoke about so-called democratic socialism in Sweden. So I was very often there. I think he was never there. He understands nothing about Sweden. Sweden was a kind of democratic socialism 50 years ago, but it failed totally. Swedish people are smart people. They understood it. They got rid of this crazy socialism. Today, according to this index of economic freedom that I mentioned before, Sweden is much more capitalist as the United States. They are ranked in this ranking number 10. The United States is number 25. And in Sweden, they have 60% more billionaires, adjusted to population than in the United States. So these are the books that these people read. They will not read my book, I'm sure. I wrote my book for people like you or people to listen to us who are pro-free market, to support them with all the facts, all the arguments. So wherever you discuss, that you can win every discussion because you have all the facts.
The facts. Yeah, and I would wager, Dr. Zitelmann, that Bernie Sanders did not give that book away for free. He sold it. So, you're right to be angry about capitalism. Now here, let me sell you a book. That just, the hypocrisy of it is laughable. And your book, just to remind everybody, it's In Defense of Capitalism, is the title of the latest book. And I certainly recommend that one. I'm definitely gonna have to grab a copy of it and read it. And by the way, my wife, is Swedish. So
So you know, so you know that it's crazy that it's not socialist today. Yes,
No.
they have high income tax. This is true, but in New York City you have also very high income tax, and in Sweden they abolished wealth tax. They have no more wealth tax. They have no inheritance tax. They have no gift tax. If Bernie Sanders want to make United States a little bit like Sweden, I recommend to him start with abolishing inheritance tax, abolishing wealth tax, abolishing. Then you can have a little bit more like Sweden.
And you know, Dr. Zitelmann, the thing that gets me about this argument that folks like Bernie Sanders make, they will always compare the United States to a country like Sweden or Denmark or a tiny little Nordic country and say, if we just embrace this, that the entire country of Sweden would fit into the state of Georgia with room to spare. The United States of America is a vast country. It is a huge country, 330 million people here that we know about. And you can't compare it to a tiny little country and say, why don't we just do what they do? Because even when they do it, as you rightly point out, they reject it after years of misery suffering through it. No?
Yes, and the other thing, there's another trick from socialists. They like to compare their utopia with reality. And of course, this is always bad for reality. If you have a perfect vision of a perfect society, your perfect utopia, and then you compare it to real life, then utopia is always better. But it would be the same. And I don't know, are you married?
I am.
So think you come home later and your wife tells you, we have to talk about divorce. I don't hope so, but because she started to read romantic love novels where they kiss every morning, it's always perfect harmony. And she said, I compared our marriage with this book. Now we should get divorced because it's not like in this romantic love novel. You would say, hey, it's not really fair. Please compare it with our neighbors or with our friends. Then we have a good marriage. So, but this is what socialists do. They compare a book or a vision, utopia, with reality. And I do something different. For example, in this film, Life Behind the Berlin Wall, I compare East and West Germany. Or in my book, I compare like Venezuela and Chile. This is also Venezuela. Let's speak about Venezuela. This is a good example. Venezuela was, in 1970, one of the 20 richest countries in the world. One of the 20 richest countries. They had a high standard of living. And then they started what we do now in Europe and what you do in the United States with a lot of regulation, labor market regulation, and so on, especially labor market regulation. And situation became worse. But then, you know what happens? If situation becomes worse, sometimes people are not smart and they think, okay, we should have more of this to solve the problem. So they
double down on stupid.
Yes, they go the wrong way and then they think we should go faster. And so in this case, they voted for Hugo Chavez in 1998. Hugo Chavez. Yeah. And left-wing intellectuals all over the world were so enthusiastic. I have all the quotes in the United States. Barbara Walters, for example, she admired him. He's great. He cares about poverty. And you know, they were really enthusiastic. They called it the socialism in 21st century. And then you know what happened? In the first years, it was not so bad because he had good luck that oil prices increased and though she could spend a lot for social welfare. But then oil prices came down. He started nationalizing everything. And what socialists do? Inflation was 1 billion %, 1 billion %. 10% of the population fled from Venezuela now. A lot of people fled. The rest of the people who stayed there, there's starvation, there's hunger, and of course, then they abolished democracy. There's no freedom of press, no freedom of speech, no democracy. So this is what happened in Venezuela. And now, if you speak with the same socialists who recommended we should learn something from Venezuela, and this is the socialism of the 21st century. And now you tell them, no, what do you think about what happened in Venezuela? They tell you, oh, no, this wasn't true socialism.
Exactly.
This is not, and they did it all the time. They admired even Joseph Stalin, who was one of the worst mass murders in history. They admired Mao Zedong. And after this failed, oh no, this wasn't real socialism. And if you ask, where is your real socialism? It's nowhere in the world. It's only in their fantasy.
Exactly right. I've got to take another break, but I want to come back and pick it up right there because that is absolutely spot on. You have just described every single debate that I ever had in college with these socialists because they always said, Stalin, oh, he wasn't a real socialist. Oh, and Mao, everything you just said. I mean, it's like I'm hearing a debate I had 30 years ago, and they still parrot that line. My guest today is Dr. Rainier Zitelmann. You're listening to the Steve Hook program. We're going to pick up right where we left off on TNT Radio right after this.
De-weaponizing weather with reality and perspective.
Cyclone Lisa made landfall as a Category 5 cyclone far enough to the northeast of Port Hedland that they were spared. There were other places that weren't so fortunate, though. That part of the Australian coast is not really populated by a whole heck of a lot of people, though. There is a small town on the Australian coast that has 52 people in it, and I hope they got out of the way, Pardue. De Grey is inland, so it was mitigated somewhat there. In any case, that will continue inland with heavy rains across much of central Australia and even into the south-central part of Australia, as this is going to persist and actually hook up with a front that's coming across Australia. So a very big weather event, no question about that, but it is cyclone season, and that's what happens in that part of the world. This is TNT climate and weather watchdog meteorologist Joe Bastardi asking you to enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you've got.
Imagine being invisible. You could mess with someone's mind, sneak up on them, and they wouldn't know you're there. Even scare them to death. When you speed on our roads, that's what happens, because no one sees you coming. Think road safety. A message from the government of South Australia.
Opinionated, informed, and unafraid. Steve Hook on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Okay, welcome back to the Steve Hook Show. My guest today, Dr. Rainier Zitelmann. Dr. Zitelmann, what you were just saying is so spot on because every debate I've ever had with these young, know-nothing socialists, well, they're not really socialists. They just claim to want to be socialists. And, of course, it's easy to say you love socialism when you're living in the lap of luxury in a capitalist society and you're texting me on a $1,200 phone or whatever. But it does remind me of debates I had in college. I said 30 years ago. It was closer to 40 some odd years ago. But that's what they all said. Well, this wasn't real socialism. I'm also reminded of when Barack Obama ran as president, he kept saying, we are the ones we've been waiting for. As if the great socialist utopia is just right around the corner if we just get it right. And we're going to tell you how to get it right, and they never do they?
And the problem is, another example, I've been in Argentina last year, and in Argentina, it was, what a lot of people don't know, 100 years ago, one of the richest countries, like United States 100 years ago, very rich country. Then they started with their Peronist crazy politics. People expect to get everything from the state. Everything from the state. This is the philosophy of socialism. You get everything from the state. And then when I was in Argentina, I had a lot of lectures there. The young people now, they start to understand that it's wrong if you explain it to them in an easy way. And I had a funny experience there. I had a lecture, and there was a young man sitting in the first row. He wasn't really handsome, so I thought maybe he has no girlfriend. And I asked him, hey, do you have a girlfriend? And he said, no, I don't have one. I asked him, would you like to have a really pretty girlfriend? He said, oh, yeah, I would like. Then I asked him, what do you expect? Who will bring you this pretty girlfriend? The government? The state? And he had to laugh. No, I don't expect so. But what do you think? Who's responsible for getting this pretty girlfriend? And he said, I think that's me. Then I answered, yes, that's it. Not only with his girlfriend, it's with money. It's with everything that is important in life. It's on you. Don't expect it from the government. Don't expect it from the state. It's on you. And this is a philosophy. And I think this is what was the American dream, the American philosophy, why a lot of people from all over the world, they came to the United States, because the United States became so successful because this was the most capitalist country, and people loved it, and they came to make their own way. They didn't come to the United States because they expected to get the money from the government. They came there because good ideas, hard work, and they thought, if I have good ideas, if I'm really ambitious, I can make it there. Like, for example, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he came with 20 years to the United States from a simple family in Austria. And he could make it. He could be this Hollywood movie star, bodybuilder, in politics and so. This was the United States. And I think the United States and should go back to this, what it was like in the years of Ronald Reagan. I admire him very much, Ronald Reagan. And now, if you look what they do, even more debt, printing money. This is not the way how nation becomes wealthy. If you print more money, this is the way to have high inflation in the end. This is what happens right now.
Yeah, and yeah, you're right. And of course, it's kind of the road to serfdom too, because as you properly pointed out with Hugo Chavez and now of course Maduro in Venezuela, it becomes, you get a little taste of the sugar. It seems good at first. And now in order to keep the sugar flowing, well, we're going to have to confiscate this. We're going to have to take that. No more free press, no more. And I don't understand how people, relatively intelligent people, can't seem to figure this out. It's a scary place we live in right now when you have to defend capitalism. Here's an idea: defend socialism for me. You can't. There is no defense of socialism. There's certainly no defense of communism.
I ask people always, please show me one single country in history where socialism made the life of ordinary people better. This is what you have to understand. Capitalism is not only good for rich people, it's much more important for the poor people. I have another example, Poland. Poland was one of the poorest countries in Europe, poorer than Ukraine. GDP was half of Czech Republic. And then they had these capitalist reforms in 1990, and today it's 25 years. I'm very often there in Poland. It's Europe's growth champion. It's amazing what happened. And capitalism improved standard of living for them too much. Or I spoke about Vietnam. Vietnam was in 1990 the poorest country in the world, poorer than African countries. First, they had the war, and what was not destroyed by the war was destroyed by the planned economy. But they are smart in Vietnam. They tried it for 10 years. Then after the war, planned economy, they say it doesn't work. And then they started pro-market reforms, introduced private property. And I met there a young woman, an entrepreneur, and she told me, my parents, they educated me in this way: think like American, even dress like American, eat like American, hear the same music, then you will be successful. I admire these people. I thought maybe they have some, because of the war. I think it could be understandable if they have some, negative attitude toward the United States. I would understand it, of course, but it's not the case. They don't like Chinese people, yes, but but they love Americans there. I had a survey there, and for young people, we asked them, what economic system do you like and what not? At the top was Japan. Number 2 for young people was United States. And the last one was North Korea. This was the last one. So they learned their lesson.
Gee, maybe we won that war after all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a great point. Of course, Dr. Zitelmann, we're also seeing this. We don't have much time left. I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the program, but lately we've been seeing what's going on in Paris. Macron decides that he wants to. We've got to raise the retirement age, and the whole damn city of Paris goes up in flames because of it. And this is what happens when you demand entitlements from your government. They're easy to give out, but they're not very easy to take away, are they?
Yes, absolutely. And I think they are really crazy. It's only 2 more years from 62 to 64 to work. Yeah. When this pension system was introduced, people, they had a life expectancy. Maybe it was only 63, 64 years. And now they live, what is the good news? They get maybe 80 years or something like it. So it's not, and we have this problems with demography, that not more enough children are born. And so I think it's logical, but yes, they're really upset. It's crazy what happens there. And, for my book, we did a survey how people think about capitalism in 34 countries. It is the biggest poll ever. I commissioned this poll. Was very expensive with one of the most prestigious polling institutes in the world. And French people are one of the most anti-capitalist countries in the world. And we had another survey, how envious people are. Also very interesting, because socialism and being envious has a lot to do. And French people were the most envious in our survey.
Well, Dr. Zitelmann, there's my music, so I have to go. I've really enjoyed this, and I would love to have you on the program again. Folks, check out the book, In Defense of Capitalism, and of course, the movie, Behind the Berlin Wall, Life Behind the Berlin Wall. Dr. Rainier Zitelmann, thank you so much, sir. You have a great day.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will be back. Bye.
Good. I look forward to that. All right, coming up on TNT Radio, it's The Reckoning with Timothy Shea. Until next week, have a wonderful weekend. I'm Steve Hook on TNT Radio. Goodbye.